I'm ready.
Hi, Rabbi Blumenthal. Thank you so much for coming.
You're
So
welcome.
the first
Thank you for having
question,
me. Go ahead.
thank you. The first question I want to ask you. So you're kind of an unusual person in the debate scene in terms of the counter-missionary. Most of the debaters or most of the high-level rabbonim that target or that counter the missionaries tend to be from more of a Baltasheba background. What's your background? I believe you went to Ponevezh and you're from quite a black and white background. Can you tell us about that?
Black and white, yeah. Yes, I grew up in Toronto. Actually, I was born in the United States, but my parents moved to Toronto when I was a little child. Toronto, Canada. That's where I went to elementary school. Uh, learned in the high school known as South Fallsburg. It's a little hick town in the Catskills, which is like one of the top yeshivas in the United States. I actually have a son learning there now. And then I went to Ponevezh. I was there from 84 to 89. And since then, I'm in Lakewood, BMG, which is, this is, regular mainstream black hat yeshivas, Haredi yeshivas, if you will. My parents are, my father's from, a Yerushalmi family. And my mother's actually from England, but also real, you might have heard there was a yeshiva in England called Schneider's Yeshiva in London. This was, and
Right.
that's my great grandfather was the Rosh Yeshiva there. So that's where I come from.
Are
In
you are you Rav of Shul by any chance, or
Yes, I happen to be a Rav Shul.
how
Like
does
I
it
joke
work out
around.
for
I tell
you?
people I work on Shabbos.
Right. How does it work out for you managing both jobs in terms of being in one separate area in terms of as a Rav, managing a shul, and then a totally separate dynamic, which is the counter missionary movement, which is just totally different.
So let me say this much: is the count? I'll be honest with you, the counter-missionary movement doesn't take up that much of my time. If you ask me which two jobs I have, I wouldn't put counter-missionary on the list. It's just something I do on the side. I enjoy doing it, and you know when when I was younger and I first got into this, I wasn't sure should I do it, shouldn't I do it. So I went to my Rav, who is from Toronto. That's where I grew up. Shlomo Miller, who was also like right wing black hat, and he very much encouraged me to get involved with this. And so there are times, specific times when I was interacting with different people, so it would take more of my time. But generally, most of the day, that's not what I do. Most of the day, the shul that I have is basically only a Shabbos shul. It's, in other words, during the weekdays, I get shilas from the congregants, but we don't have. I don't have to run a minyan on Shabbos in the weekdays, only on Shabbos. And in the
Mhm.
weekdays, I spend my time. I study with different people. People pay me to learn with them, and a lot of working people in Lakewood that want to have a harusa for a half hour a day, for a few hours a day, and I learn with different people throughout the day.
Right.
Gemara, I'm saying, but
Something,
not.
yeah, right. Something that's really put you on the radar is your debate with Dr. Brown, which I'm sure you knew would obviously be mentioned. Can you tell us a bit about this debate and how it went and what you got from it?
So, first of all, I'm not sure which debate you're referring to. Are you referring to the most recent one, which is like entitled "Face to Face"? Is that the one you're referring to?
I'm referring to the one from about 7 years ago.
Oh, yeah, so 2017. So that okay, right? Okay, so that was okay. So that's a long story. One second. Excuse me. So I met Dr. Brown years and years ago. In I think it was 2001 or 2000. It was a long time ago that I met Dr. Brown. And don't call me exactly on the dates. He's better at it than I am actually when it comes to these type of details. We met in a place called Grantham, Pennsylvania, which is a place where the Messianics have a conference every year. And at that point, two of his 5-volume series were out already, and two of his 5-volume series were out already. At that point, it was projected just the third volume will come out. Not it wasn't projected to be 5 volumes. It was projected to be finished in like about a year. And I had written a little booklet called "You Are My Witnesses." That was the only thing I had done in a public sense in the counter-missionary field at that point. It's still available on the Jews For Judaism Canada website, and we sort of agreed to this, critique each other's written work. So I started sending him emails, page by page, critiquing his 2 volumes, and we had this went on to like about 2006.
Right.
At that point, he said he doesn't have time for these emails anymore. I was, of course, disappointed, but he was saying he doesn't have time. He's a very busy person. And then in 2007, he came. Maybe it was the end of 2006, beginning 2007. He came out with there's a book called "The Case for Jesus," I think, by Lee Strobel,
Right.
and one section is Dr. Brown's basically a synopsis of, at that point there was already 4 volumes, a synopsis of his 4 volumes. And when I read that, I realized that not one of my arguments did he even acknowledge. Like, he didn't move any of his argument. He basically said everything that he had said in his book, and anything that I had told him, like, just as if it bounced off, nothing
Totally
happened,
disregarded.
totally disregarded. So at that point, that's the first time I came out with something public called Contra Brown. That was 2007. And when he finished his 5th volume, I came out with, which is in 2010, I came out with Elephant in the Suit, which is a critique of all 5 volumes. A small, again, it's small, but it doesn't have to be big, because like I use that mashal, that parable, to bust a balloon, just you need a pin. The balloon could be as big as you want.
Yeah.
And both of those, and then I came out and after that would supplement the Contra Brown, which is filling in a lot of blanks that I didn't address in the shorter works. And he basically told me he will be responding in writing. He actually gave me the names of the books or articles that he's going to write in response to Contra Brown and the Elephant in the Suit. And time went on and he didn't respond. And so I think it was about 2015, 2016, I started coming out with a series of videos called Unanswered, in which I challenged Dr. Brown to respond. And his basic answer was, let's have a debate. Let's have a debate. Now, I don't believe that a debate is the most fruitful way to dialogue about this. I think a debate is just a show. And I actually believe that in a debate, the one who's more dishonest has an unbelievable advantage. Because the reason people enjoy debates is because the same reason people enjoy watching a boxing match. They enjoy the knockout.
Right.
They enjoy the challenge, the conflict between 2 people and 2 powers, and they're looking for the knockout. So in an intellectual debate, what's the knockout? If I'm able to ask a question and the other guy stands there with his mouth, his jaw drops. So that's the knockout. Now, if a guy's dishonest, it won't happen, because whatever you're going to say, he can laugh it off. It'll only happen to an honest person. So the more dishonest you are, the more of a chance you have of quote unquote winning the debate. And besides, in a debate, for example, if you ask me a question that I didn't hear of before, I want to have time to think of it. I don't want to just give you my first knee-jerk reaction answer.
It doesn't mean your religion's wrong. It just means you're unable to represent at that moment.
Exactly. And a lot of times people ask me questions and I say, let me think about it. I'll discuss with my friends. I'll look up in the library, whatever it is, and I come with an answer. I don't have to answer on the spot. So, but he was insisting on a debate. So I proposed the following, that we put out the subject we agreed upon was the real Jewish Messiah. I think it was May of 2017 at noon of May 15th. Each one will put out a 20-minute video on that subject. A month later, on June 15th, we'll put out our rebuttals, and on July, we'll put out our closing statements. And that would be the format of debate. Now, what happened is in his first segment, he made a mistake. He made a mistake which actually had made in the past. And I actually sent him an email about the mistake he made, and he made the mistake again. The mistake was, I'll spell it out, that we have a few minutes, is that part of his argument was, and I believe in this detail he's right, is that if you want to understand Isaiah 53, which again for them is a key passage, you have to understand it in light of the previous chapters. You don't read it out of context. Correct. And his point was that in the chapters leading up to Isaiah 53, the prophet, I mean, from chapter 40 to 49, the prophet focused on the people of Israel as God's servant. But when it comes from chapters 49 till 52, until right before 53, then there's an individual servant within the larger nation that the prophet is focusing on. And he claimed that there's more of an emphasis on the individual servant in those 4 chapters than there are in the 8 chapters preceding that. So his math was wrong, by the way. It's not true. It's simply not true. In fact, the 2 chapters before Isaiah 53 is the most intense focus on the nation of Israel. So I brought that up. It didn't occur to me that he didn't grasp that if you're going to count references and you're going to try to figure out where the emphasis is, well, if in 4 chapters I have, let's say, 80 references, and in 8 chapters I have 100 references, then in the 80 references in 4 chapters is more of a focus than the 100 references in the 8 chapters. So he didn't get that mathematical piece, and he was saying it's more reference over here than over there. What are you talking about? It didn't occur to me that he didn't get that. Whatever the case was, this was the conversation after the debate. I pointed that out in my second segment. Now, another detail that happened was that before the whole debate started, he asked me, like, we made up what the format of the videos is going to be. Now, in some of my videos that I've done before, it wasn't even me, by the way, it was the crew in Jews for Judaism Canada. They put notes in, or they put the like verses on the bottom, like, you can have as you run the video. There's some there's overlay of words. He wanted to know if I'm going to be doing that, and if I'm putting notes in or referring to notes. And I said yes. The fact is, I didn't end up doing it. In the first video, I didn't end up doing it. In the second video, I made reference to notes that are, that I linked to notes. In other words, I answered some of his questions he raised in the first video. I answered them in notes as opposed to answering them on the video. He felt that was unethical. And he spent basically his whole third video slamming me personally. And I was convinced that the reason he did that was because I caught him on a mistake. And he was just trying to avoid, admitting to his mistake.
So
I wrote
very quickly,
go ahead.
Just so we're following. So his mistake was essentially saying that leading up to Isaiah 53, there was sort of a deterrence away from speaking of the nation of Israel. And you counter that by saying that although this was the case, there was much more of a personal.
No. I'll spell it out again.
Okay.
The prophet Isaiah speaks of, actually, there's 3 servants. There's 3 servants that Isaiah speaks of in the chapters, the later chapters of Isaiah. Primarily, the servant is Israel. Within Israel, there are 2 individual servants that are focused on, and it's not so clear that they're 2 different ones, but I believe that one of them is the prophet and one of them is the Messiah. And Dr. Brown was arguing that although the prophet spent a lot of time speaking about the people of Israel, and spend putting his focus on the people of Israel up to chapter 49, he believed chapter 49 is a pivot. And at that point, and actually the beginning of chapter 49, there is a focus on an individual servant within the nation. Obviously, I believe that individual servant in chapter 49 is a prophet. He believes it's the Messiah. Fine. But his argument is that this was a literary tool that the prophet is using to help us understand that by the time we get to Isaiah 53, the servant is no longer Israel, or at least the focus is not Israel anymore. The focus is an individual servant. And he simply didn't read Isaiah, because yes, in the beginning of chapter 49, there is a focus on an individual servant within the nation. But in chapters 51 and 52, there's an unbelievable emphasis on the nation of Israel as God's servant. Maybe he doesn't use the word servant, but so using his logic, in other words, his logic is that whoever the prophet is focusing on and zooming in our attention right before Isaiah 53, that's what Isaiah 53 is talking about. That was his argument. And he just simply didn't calculate. Basically what he was looking for was the word Israel and the word Jacob. And the word Israel and the word Jacob, the prophet happens not to use those words, but he has he uses the word Zion. He uses the words my nation.
Correct.
He uses the words,
from you saying 51 to 52 leading up to 53.
Yeah, so it's jammed. it's jammed with, and not only, by the way, are there references to the servant, to Israel as a servant, to the nation as a servant. They are speaking positively about Israel. For example, a nation that has my law in their heart, the bearers of the vessels of the Lord. A lot of positive references, which you don't find anywhere else in Scripture. So, if again, using his logic, not my logic, it's his logic, that the chapters before Isaiah 53, the focus of the prophet in those chapters will help you understand what Isaiah 53 is talking about. Using his logic, will be the nation of Israel, will not be, or at least the righteous of Israel. And and so after the debate, we went back and forth in emails, and it took him a long time to figure out that he made a mistake. And he ended up making an apology video that, acknowledging that he made a mistake. He said, but it was only a very minor part of his argument and whatever. So we went back and forth with some articles after that as well. By the way, I think this proves the point that debate is not a good place to have such a dialogue.
Yeah, yeah.
Because go ahead.
There's something I read in your work. I believe it was Contra Brown, and I've seen you represent this argument quite a few times, which is that the covenant at Mount Sinai is something very central to our belief as Jews, and we take this covenant and we center everything around this. Can you maybe give a brief explanation on this?
Yes, I think that's actually the most foundational issue. And I think a lot of people, when they debate Christians, they make this mistake, is that they allow the Christian to create a template for the debate. And in the Christian mind, again, you're not debating Catholics usually, you're debating Protestants who believe in the idea of only Scripture, which is, by the way, a non-scriptural idea. And according to that way of thinking, you only figure things out by what Scripture says, and I guess it's like they look at it like an algebra equation. Like you only figure out what the a or the x is based on after you make the whole calculation. But it's not true, and I'll explain. When you open the Bible, first verse, in the beginning, God created the heaven and earth, right? So the question you have to ask yourself is, did the author of this book expect his audience to know what that word God in that first verse, what it means, as they're reading the first verse? Or did he say, no, you have to wait till you get to the end of the whole book and then calculate your way backwards, just like you do an algebra equation, and then figure out what the word God means? And if you
Right.
ask yourself this question on the base of the Bible, no. When did God give? First of all, the target audience of the Bible is the Jewish people. So, by the way, anyone else who's reading it should realize you have to read it in that social context, because that's the context that God put it into. But God gave the book to the people after, not only after they knew who God is, after they were bound up in a relationship with God, and that relationship was built on the exodus from Sinai and the exodus from Egypt and the Sinai revelation. And it says clearly in Deuteronomy 4:35, chapter 4, verse 35, unto you, that's the Jewish people, it was shown in order that you know that the Lord is God and there is none else beside him. So in other words, the Jewish people are, when they read the book, that is the context. That's the only true context of the book. So all these debates about the Trinity, or it's silly. The book itself points to the testimony of the Jewish people, and that's the only context from within which to read the book. If you're reading the book without that, you're reading out of context.
So I'd just like to ask a question on Jewish belief, because you do so much discussion with, you've done so much discussion in the past with clarifying Jewish belief. So really, I'd like to ask, what's the basis for the Jewish claim that the Messiah isn't divine?
That the Messiah isn't
divine. Yes.
Well, why would he be divine? Meaning to say, is God is divine. God is divine, and that's it. There's nothing more to it. What's the base for Jewish belief that the Messiah is not an elephant? I mean, I don't have to prove that. You have to prove that he is divine. Like, why would I think that?
Well, what if a Christian were to say to you, well, it says in Isaiah 9 verse 6 that the Messiah will be Kel Gibor.
Okay, so first of all, I would tell him, if Isaiah really meant what you're telling me he meant, then he was a false prophet. And I'll explain what I mean. In other words, how do we know Isaiah was a true prophet? That means the title prophet is probably one of the most misused terms in the history of mankind. People claim prophecy, and both Jews and Christians believe that they were false prophets, and that the Bible acknowledges that false prophets could come along, perform signs and wonders, and still be false prophets. So what's our measuring stick that God gave us to help us figure out if the prophet's a true prophet or a fraud? And the answer to that question is in Deuteronomy. They actually gave us several measuring sticks, but one of them is in Deuteronomy 13. It says that if a prophet arises and speaks in the name of a God that your fathers did not know, he's a false prophet. And we're supposed to stone him and ignore. It doesn't say stone him, whatever, it says kill him. And it says ignore, even if he predicts a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder comes to pass. It could be this. It doesn't limit the sign or the wonder. It could be a resurrection of the dead. It could be stopping the sun in the middle of the sky. God tells us to ignore that and to kill the prophet. But why? What basis? That means, maybe the prophet is. Why should we listen to Moses over this prophet? Maybe this prophet is bigger than Moses. And the answer is because the measuring stick we have is our perception of God. And that was something that God taught us directly, not through Moses, not through any prophet. Like I said, again, I'm going to quote Deuteronomy 4:35 again. Deuteronomy 4:35 says, unto you it was shown in order that you know that there is no God besides God. In other words, the foundation of Judaism is our perception of God, which we got directly from God. We didn't get it from anybody else. So for starters, if Isaiah is saying what the Christian is saying, he's saying that he was a false prophet, and our nation made a mistake, not in rejecting Jesus, but in accepting Isaiah. So that's step one. That's step one.
So
now, if you want to, now obviously the Jewish people are not stupid, and we have our perception of God, and we accepted Isaiah. And we know how to read Hebrew better than all the Christians put together, and we care about Isaiah's words more than all the Christians care about Isaiah. They don't care about his words. They just look at his book like, I don't know if you have it in England, but in America there's a kid's book called Where's Waldo, and you open the book and there's people all over the page, and the kids, my little kid, my 10-year-old girl, they look through the page and they find the guy with the colorful hat, the red and white hat. Oh, there's Waldo. Now we could go to the next page. They look at the scripture like that. They look at where's Jesus. They look through the page. Where can we find Jesus? We found Jesus on this page. Now let's turn the page. They don't care what the prophet says. So the prophecy Isaiah 9:5. Again, I'm not going to rid of that much time. It's clearly speaking about King Hezekiah. Now, whatever argument, I mean, I've written about this, and if you look at all the matchups, meaning to say is take the book seriously. There are many references to, poetic references that the prophet uses, and if you match them up with other sections, you will see that this is referring to the victory or the miracle that God did through Hezekiah, that they know that Sennacherib's army was killed at the gates of Jerusalem, and just like one of the things it says in Isaiah 9:6 is mighty God. Now, the words mighty God are actually a translation of Hezekiah's name. Hezekiah means mighty God. So again, everything's in context. But I want to point out, I think, a very important thing gets lost in this whole discussion. The way the Christians they want to control the template. I mean, I'm not sure if they're doing this consciously, but it doesn't occur to them that there is another template. The way they look at it is, it's a philosophical question. Is God one or is he three? Could God be a man? All of that. That's not what the discussion is about. That's not what the discussion is about, because idolatry is not a sin of the mind. It's a sin of the heart. In other words, if someone believes something falsely, he's not an idolater. He may be a heretic if you want, or whatever it is, but idolater is someone who worships. That means he bends his heart, he submits, to another entity besides God. That's what idolatry is. So the Christians worship Jesus. There's not a question about that. If someone says, I believe that Jesus died for my sins, but I have no feeling in my heart for him, I don't love him, and I don't care for him, I just believe he died for my sins, he's not a Christian. A Christian is someone whose heart is given over to Jesus. He gave his heart to Jesus, and that's idolatry. That's idolatry. Now all these arguments are trying to justify that. They're trying to justify that, because God could be a man, or in Isaiah it says that the Messiah is supposed to be divine. That's all justifying another worship. But the Bible makes it very clear. You know what idolatry is? any worship that you weren't doing before. Now, if they believed really that Jesus is one and the same as God, they wouldn't be trying to convert the Jews. We worship God. So, no, but they're not happy. We're not worshiping Jesus. Okay, so that means Jesus is not God. So don't turn around and tell me Jesus is God. Because if Jesus would be God, you wouldn't bother me. You let me live. Imagine like this. Jesus knocks on your door one day, right? Knock, knock. Here I am. Says, who are you? I'm Jesus. I want you to worship. So you tell the guy, listen, sit here outside. Wait outside. Close the door. I'll let you in. If you want a cup of coffee, I'll let you in. But right now, I'm not going to let you in. You want me to worship you? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back into my house. You wait outside right by the doorstep. I'm going to go back into my house. I'm going to pray to the creator of heaven and earth. I'm going to give my heart to him. I'm going to cry to him. I'm going to sing to him. I'm going to worship God, the creator of heaven and earth. Now, if that satisfies you, fantastic. And if it doesn't, it's also fantastic. Because if it doesn't satisfy you, that means you're not God. Don't tell me you're God if you're not satisfied with my worship of God. It's simply this conversation I had with Brown in this summer in 2024. It's a different love. It's not there. It's nothing to do. Again, it's about who. It's like a marriage. Imagine a woman comes home with another man. She claims this man is an incarnation of her husband. It's adultery. Nothing to talk about. Don't give me any philosophy. It's another relationship. Yeah. It's simply another relationship. We have a relationship with God. We love God, and there's reasons why we love God. Our hearts are drawn to God, and the whole book of Psalms explains and articulates the Jewish love and worship and devotion to God. And that's not good for the Christian. He wants also a devotion for Jesus. Okay, so that's idolatry. There's nothing to talk about. The conversation.
It's why, as you said before, that if you read the book of Isaiah in a Christian Bible, you'd be tricked into believing that maybe there are only 3 chapters, 7, 9, and 53.
Yes.
And the same thing is true in Tehillim also.
Yeah, again, like I said, it's only valuable to the degree that you can pull out Jesus from it. There's no other value to the book for that.
Finishing off, would you say that a fair summary of the argument that you're making using the pasuk in Devarim would be the fact that as Jews, we very much see that this pasuk, that we saw no form and we can worship no form, as fundamental and center to our covenant with God, and therefore anything that comes forward from then on opposing this must be rejected because we do see that as idolatry, because it was something not known to our fathers. Would that be an accurate summarization?
Yes, pretty good. Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, once you say the words "no form," then they jump right away and say, "Well, they quoted Numbers 12 and
where Moshe so
etc." Yeah, etc. So yes,
correct.
But again, the answer to all those questions is that's why I wouldn't use the word "no form" because that's the point. The point simply is we have a relationship. We have a relationship with God already. We're married already. We're married already. Leave us alone. We're not looking for another shidduch. We're not looking for another spouse. We have one already. And what are we missing with God? What are we missing with Him?
Correct.
I would just point out that throughout Scripture, God appears in a form to the prophets, to Gideon, to Moshe, etc., but never for the purpose of worship. Never is it that now Moshe comes down and says, "Yes, I saw the image of God, and now this is what we're supposed to worship." It's always to bring across a message, to make a point, but as it relates to worship, as it relates to who it is that we're supposed to worship and to understand and to have feelings towards what it is that we're supposed to worship, it's always the God that's above and beyond all nature. And again, as it relates to worship, right, never form. And again, as it relates to worship, the covenant was sealed between God and the Jewish people at Sinai. Let me just have a finishing line over here. All of Judaism stands basically on 3 points. Point number 1 and is our perception of God, which is something that came not through a prophet, not through a book. It came from God to the Jewish people, and it's recorded in the Bible. That's what happened. The second point is that Moses is his prophet. That's the second point that Judaism stands on, and that's also something that came directly from God to the people. What do I mean? Well, let's say, for example, the greatest prophet that we had since Moses was Joshua. He stopped the sun in the sky. So that proves that he's a prophet. Not only proves that he's a prophet. We didn't see, no one heard God speaking to Joshua. It says in Exodus 19, if I'm not mistaken, it's verse 6 or verse 9. Behold, I come to you in the thick of the cloud, in order that the nation hear me speaking to you. This is God talking to Moses. So he's the only prophet that has this claim that God spoke to him and the nation heard God speaking to him. So that's another piece of information that, again, didn't come through a book, didn't come through a prophet. It came directly from God to the people. So that's 1 and 2. And the third one is simply the fact that the third detail of our faith is that the Jewish nation are the witnesses for the first two. There is no nation that has any claim that's similar to that they encountered God as a nation, and that God established a prophet with that level of credibility that did for Moses to a nation. That's it. That's all Judaism is built on, those 3 points. And those 3 points are just what God gave to us directly, without Moses, without any books. And a typical thing I tell them, people ask me, what's the one-liner you tell a missionary? I tell them like this: the one-liner you tell them is, he like I mentioned before, he brings Isaiah over, and he says, start Isaiah 53, whatever it is, Isaiah 9, or Isaiah was a false prophet. And then he says, what are you talking about? And I say, listen, the reason I believe Isaiah is a true prophet is because I believe that my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my ancestors knew how to sort out between the true prophets and the frauds. You don't believe that. You believe they made a mistake when it came to Jesus. So as far as you're concerned, Isaiah is a false prophet. Because if they made a mistake with Jesus, then how do you know they didn't make a mistake with Isaiah?
Lovely. Thank you so much, Rabbi Blumenthal.